Next on Mysteries at the Museum. Washington, D.C. America's proud capital is home to the largest museum complex in the world, the Smithsonian Institution. One branch of the Smithsonian, the National Museum of American History, is renowned for its collection of national treasures, like Abraham Lincoln's top hat and George Washington's uniform. And on display on one of the main floors is a relic from a volatile era in American history. It is made of metal and wood. It's 21 feet wide, 4.5 feet tall, and is accompanied by 4 fading vinyl chairs. But this restaurant lunch counter is more than a slice of 1950s Americana.
What's interesting about it is not so much that it's a lunch counter, but what happened there.
How did this ordinary lunch counter become center stage in an event that would help overturn centuries of oppression and change America forever? The story begins in 1960, half a century ago, when the United States is a segregated nation. The separation of blacks and whites in restaurants and other public areas is enforced by law, especially in the South. A mass movement for racial equality is growing. But for those demanding civil rights, there is reason to be cautious.
It's important to understand that segregation was supported by tremendous violence. Stepping out of line could subject someone and their family to lynching, to beatings, all kinds of essentially terror activities.
But in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 young African-American college students, outraged by the daily humiliations of being treated like second-class citizens, decide it's time to take a stand, whatever the risk. Their names are David Richmond, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair, and Joseph McNeil. On the afternoon of February 1st, the 4 students walk into the Woolworth's Five and Dime and sit down at this lunch counter, which is clearly designated whites only.
The white waitress who was there came over to them and said, "You know you can't sit here, why don't you just leave?" And they said, no, very politely, "No, we're going to sit here until we are served."
Soon, a policeman arrives. This is the critical moment the 4 young teenagers had feared most.
The prospect of arrest was terrifying because many young black men had disappeared from Southern jails, never to be seen again.
Despite their fears, the young men defied the policeman's orders to leave.
But this policeman was not sure what really to do because they weren't creating a disruption. They were just quietly sitting there asking to be served.
Fortunately for the 4 boys, the policeman decides not to arrest them.
So eventually the manager just closes down the lunch counter and probably thinks that after they did it this one time, that'll be it.
But the next day, the 4 return with several friends from college who sit with them in protest at the same counter. On the 3rd day, 60 students join in.
The supporters grew and grew and grew. They gained support from some parts of the white community that they hadn't expected.
And by February 4th, the 4th day of the protest, 300 people jam inside the store to show solidarity. Soon the media arrives, and the protest becomes national news. And what started as a grassroots action ignites a mass movement, spurring tens of thousands of protesters to stage sit-ins across the country.
There are more than 80 sit-ins in 9 different states.
But violent opposition to the protesters is also mounting.
There are mobs of angry supporters of segregation. People yell at them, spit at them, make death threats to them. People are beaten and people are arrested.
Americans across the country are shocked by the dramatic events unfolding on TV.
To have African Americans treated as if they were dogs, it made obvious what was wrong about segregation.
Then, back where it all began, in Greensboro, North Carolina, the Woolworth's manager puts a sudden end to the protest in his city. Fed up with days of disruption and chaos, he simply closes the store. And the 4 college students that started it all go home. At that point, they don't know if their actions have made any difference. Then something extraordinary happens. On July 26th, after 6 months of unflattering publicity, the Greensboro store reopens with an unexpected announcement.
They reopen, and Woolworth decides to desegregate that store. That was a pivotal moment in the modern civil rights movement and in the history of the United States.
Blacks and whites can now sit as equals at this very lunch counter.
Eventually, that leads to the desegregation of lunch counters in Woolworths across the country. The Greensboro sit-in and the 4 young men were successful, and ultimately, the civil rights movement is successful in changing America.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
And soon, the landmark Civil Rights Act mandates desegregation across the entire nation.
When I look at this lunch counter, it reminds me of the courage that it took for those 4 young men to sit here. It didn't just change America for African Americans, it changed America for everyone.
This countertop has long been out of service. But here at the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, the legacy of the Greensboro 4 lives on. Radioactive remedies and chilling ransom notes, secret tapes, and captured warships. These are the mysteries at the museum.